The flashing amber lights on my plow truck cut through the darkness at 3 in the morning, illuminating the snow-covered streets of Meadowbrook Estates as I cleared what had to be the 8th major snowfall this February in northern Michigan. I had been running my private snow removal business for 6 years now, and this winter season in Grand Rapids had been particularly brutal, keeping me and my crew working around the clock to service our commercial and residential contracts. What I did not expect that frigid Tuesday morning was to see red and blue lights joining my amber ones as a sheriff's cruiser pulled up behind my truck while I was finishing the main entrance to the subdivision. I killed the plow engine and climbed down from the cab, my boots crunching in the fresh powder. The deputy who emerged from the vehicle looked as tired as I felt, his breath creating white clouds in the sub-zero air. "Evening, officer," I said, pulling off my work glove to shake his hand. "Everything okay? Accident somewhere that needs clearing?" Deputy Martinez looked at his notepad with what I could only describe as an expression of profound confusion mixed with irritation. "Are you Russell Irving, owner of Irving Snow Services?" "That's me," I confirmed, suddenly wondering if one of my guys had done something stupid with their truck somewhere in the county. "I received a 911 call about 30 minutes ago," Martinez said slowly, as if he was still trying to process the absurdity of what he was about to say. "Complaint about emergency vehicle lights being operated illegally in this neighborhood. The caller was quite insistent that you're impersonating emergency services and disturbing the peace." I stared at him for a long moment, waiting for the punchline. "You're kidding me." "Someone called 911 because of my plow lights." Martinez shook his head. "Wish I was kidding. It gets better, though. The caller identified herself as the HOA president and demanded I cite you immediately and have your vehicle impounded." He paused, looking at my truck with its clearly marked business name and obvious snow plow attachment. "Mind showing me your permits and authorization for those lights?" I climbed back into the heated cab and retrieved my document folder, handing him my business license, county snow removal permit, and most importantly, my authorization from the county emergency services director to operate amber warning lights during snow emergencies. Michigan had declared a state of emergency 2 days ago due to the ongoing blizzard conditions, which meant my company was authorized to work continuously until roads were passable. Martinez examined the documents with his flashlight, spending extra time on the emergency services authorization. "This is all in order. You're actually listed as an essential service provider during weather emergencies." "That's right," I said. "We have contracts with the county, 3 shopping centers, 2 hospitals, and about 40 residential properties in this area. When weather gets bad like this, we're required to maintain 24-hour response capability. Those lights aren't optional. They're legally required safety equipment." The deputy handed my documents back and pulled out his radio. "Martinez to dispatch regarding that 911 call from Meadowbrook Estates. Complainant is advised that the snow removal operator is fully authorized and conducting legal emergency services. No violations observed." The radio crackled back almost immediately. "Copy that, Martinez. Be advised the complainant is calling back in now demanding to speak with your supervisor." Martinez and I exchanged a look. "Let me guess," I said. "Deborah Anderson." His eyebrows shot up. "Actually, it's a Karen Atwood. You know her." I let out a long breath that had nothing to do with the cold. "Different person, same problem. I've got a contract with 17 properties in this subdivision, all signed last summer. Ever since the first snow, the HOA has been trying to get me banned from the neighborhood. They say my trucks are too loud, too big, too bright, and that we're lowering property values by operating at night. During a declared snow emergency, Martinez said flatly. Exactly. I've explained this to them multiple times. My clients pay me specifically for priority service during storms like this. Mrs. Henderson at 423 Birch is recovering from hip surgery and needs her driveway clear for her home health aide. The Patels at 891 Oak both work at Spectrum Health and need to get to the hospital for their shifts. Mr. Richardson at 107 Maple is on oxygen and needs clear access for emergency vehicles. But the HOA keeps insisting I can only work between 9 in the morning and 5 in the evening. Martinez made some notes. And if you did that, these driveways would be under 2 feet of snow before you could get to them. Exactly. Snow removal doesn't work on a business hours schedule. It works on a when the snow is falling schedule. Another call came through Martinez's radio. This time it was his sergeant, who did not sound happy about being on the line with Karen Atwood at 3 in the morning. The conversation was brief but intense, with the sergeant's voice carrying clearly through the cold air, even from the radio speaker. Martinez, this woman is threatening to call the mayor, the county commissioner, and apparently the governor about this snow plow. Please explain to me why I'm dealing with this instead of sleeping. Martinez keyed his radio. The operator is fully licensed and authorized, Sarge. He's got emergency services authorization for 24-hour operations during the declared state of emergency. This is a civil HOA matter, not a criminal issue. That's what I told her, the sergeant replied. She's insisting that HOA rules supersede state emergency declarations. Can you please swing by the address she's calling from and explain reality to this person so I can go back to bed? I checked my watch. Look, I've got 4 more properties to clear in this subdivision, then I need to hit the hospital parking lots by 5. If you need to go talk to her, I'll continue working. I'm sure she'll call you again when she sees my lights. Martinez rubbed his face with both gloved hands. Let me follow you to your next location. When she calls again, which she will, dispatch will tell her an officer is on scene and has verified everything is legal. Maybe that'll satisfy her. It did not satisfy her. I had barely started on the Henderson driveway when 2 more vehicles arrived. Another sheriff's cruiser and a silver Lexus SUV that parked at an aggressive angle, as if the driver was prepared to block my exit. A woman in a designer puffy coat and boots that had clearly never seen actual snow before marched toward Martinez's vehicle. Finally, she announced in a voice that carried across 3 lawns. Are you the supervisor? I called 911 over an hour ago, and this man is still terrorizing our neighborhood. I could see Martinez mouth the word terrorizing to himself in disbelief. The second deputy, whose nameplate read Foster, got out of his cruiser looking equally unimpressed with this emergency. Madam, I'm Deputy Foster. I understand you have concerns about the snow removal operations. Karen Atwood was probably in her late 40s, with that particular haircut that had become synonymous with demanding to speak to managers everywhere. She pointed at my truck as if it was a war crime. That vehicle has been driving around our streets with those blinding lights for hours. It's disturbing everyone's sleep. I have 37 complaints from residents. During a blizzard, Foster asked. People are upset that their neighbors are having their driveways plowed during a blizzard. The HOA bylaws clearly state that all commercial vehicles must operate only during approved hours and must not create excessive noise or light pollution. That man is violating multiple sections of our community standards. I climbed down from my truck, deciding this conversation needed my input. Mrs. Atwood, As I've explained to you 3 times via email and once in person at last month's HOA meeting, my clients have individual contracts with my company. Those contracts supersede HOA rules because they're based on state and county emergency services requirements. Her face turned a fascinating shade of red. Your so-called clients don't have the right to break our rules. This is a planned community with standards. I'm not breaking any rules, I said, trying to keep my voice level despite running on 4 hours of sleep in the last 2 days. I have written authorization from the Kent County Emergency Services Director. During declared emergencies, I'm classified as an essential service provider, same as police, fire, and ambulance. That's ridiculous, Karen snapped. You're a snow plow driver, not a paramedic. Deputy Foster pulled out his phone and made a call, putting it on speaker. After 3 rings, a very tired but professional voice answered. Kent County Emergency Services, Director Walsh. Director Walsh, this is Deputy Foster with the Kent County Sheriff's Office. Sorry to wake you, sir, but I need clarification on something. Do you have a Russell Irving registered as an essential services provider? Irving. Walsh's voice perked up slightly. Yeah, Russell's one of our primary contractors. His company handles emergency access routes for medical facilities and first responder stations. During this current state of emergency, he's authorized for 24-hour operations with full light and equipment privileges. Why is there a problem? We have an HOA president here claiming he's not authorized to work at night in her subdivision. The director's response was immediate and sharp. That's not how this works. HOA bylaws don't supersede state emergency declarations. If someone is interfering with authorized emergency operations, that's actually a criminal violation. Russell needs to keep those medical facilities and residential emergency access routes clear. We've got ambulances that can't reach people because of this snow. Karen's mouth had fallen open. Foster thanked the director and ended the call. Madam, you just heard it directly from the county. This man is authorized to work. If you continue to interfere with his operations or continue to call 911 about this non-emergency situation, you could be charged with misuse of emergency services. This is outrageous, Karen sputtered. I'm calling my lawyer. You do that, Martinez said. But do it on a non-emergency line. 911 is for actual emergencies, not HOA disputes. Karen stormed back to her Lexus but didn't leave. Instead, she sat there with her phone pressed to her ear, presumably waking up some unfortunate attorney. I returned to Mrs. Henderson's driveway, and the 2 deputies waited until I finished before following me to my next stop at the Patel residence. True to form, Karen followed us in her Lexus. This is like the world's slowest police chase, Martinez observed as we pulled up to the Patel house. Except the suspect is following us. I had to laugh despite my exhaustion. Welcome to my winter. This has been happening since December. Dr. Patel opened his front door as I started positioning my truck. He waved at the deputies, then walked out in his scrubs and winter coat. Officers, is everything all right? Just some confusion about snow removal authorization, Foster explained. You hired Mr. Irving here? Absolutely. My wife and I are both ER physicians at Spectrum. With these storms, we need to know we can get out of our driveway for our shifts. Russell's service has been phenomenal. We've recommended him to 4 other families on this street. Karen had gotten out of her Lexus again. Dr. Patel, you should have consulted with the HOA board before hiring an outside contractor. We have approved vendors for all services. Dr. Patel, who I had learned possessed an impressively dry wit, adjusted his glasses. Mrs. Atwood, I consulted with my need to get to work to save lives. Your approved vendor doesn't offer 24-hour emergency service. Russell does. That's why I hired him. But the lights, the noise at all hours. I'm a night shift doctor, Dr. Patel interrupted. I sleep during the day. The plow noise doesn't bother me because I'm at work when Russell comes through. And even if I were home, I'd rather hear a plow than have to dig out my own driveway in a blizzard. Foster made some more notes. Mrs. Atwood, I'm starting to think this isn't really about the lights or the noise. What's the actual issue here? Karen crossed her arms defensively. The issue is that we have community standards. We have approved vendors who pay fees to operate in this neighborhood and follow our rules. Mr. Irving is undercutting them and setting a precedent that residents can just hire whoever they want. And there it was. The real problem. The HOA approved vendors paid kickbacks to operate in Meadowbrook Estates. My refusal to pay those fees and my direct contracts with residents was messing up their little money-making scheme. Let me make sure I understand this, Martinez said slowly. You're upset because residents are hiring a more qualified contractor who doesn't pay your HOA fees. That's not what I said. That's exactly what you said, Dr. Patel interjected. The HOA's approved snow service charges 3 times what Russell does and only works Monday through Friday during business hours. They told me it would be an extra $500 per storm for after-hours service. Russell includes 24-hour priority access in his standard contract. I finished Dr. Patel's driveway and moved on to Mr. Richardson's house. The deputies followed, and so did Karen. At this point, it felt like a parade. Mr. Richardson, bless him, came out with a thermos of coffee for everyone, including the deputies. He was 83 years old, a retired Air Force colonel, and had exactly 0 patience for bureaucratic nonsense. "Is this woman still harassing you, Russell?" he asked, loud enough for Karen to hear clearly. "Just doing my job, Colonel," I replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Madam," Colonel Richardson addressed Karen directly, "I was coordinating supply chains in hostile territories before you were born. I understand logistics and essential services. This young man provides an essential service. He does it well, he does it professionally, and he does it when it's needed, not when some committee decides it's convenient. Your HOA can take its bylaws and file them in the circular file for all I care. Mr. Richardson, as a resident of this community, you agreed to abide by our rules when you purchased your home. I agreed to pay my dues and maintain my property to code," the colonel shot back. "I did not agree to let you dictate who I hire for private services. My driveway is my property up to the sidewalk. Who clears it is my business." Foster's radio crackled again. "All units, be advised we're getting multiple 911 calls from Meadowbrook Estates about a disturbance. Callers reporting police vehicles and shouting." Martinez grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Martinez. We're on scene at the location. No disturbance, just an ongoing civil dispute. Who's calling this in? Multiple callers, same street. Want me to send backup? Negative, dispatch. Situation is under control." Karen's phone rang. She answered it, walked a few feet away, then returned looking smug. "That was my board vice president. We have several residents who are now concerned about police presence in our neighborhood at this hour. They're wondering if there's a safety issue." "The safety issue is going to be charging you with making false 911 calls if your people keep tying up emergency services," Foster said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Deputy Martinez and I are here because you called 911 about a snow plow. We've explained multiple times that this man is authorized to work. The matter is closed." "It is not closed," Karen insisted. "I want to file a formal complaint." Against who? Martinez asked. The snow plow driver who's legally doing his job, the residents who hired him. The county emergency services director who authorized him. Who exactly do you want to complain about? While this delightful conversation continued, I noticed more lights coming on in houses up and down the street. Several residents came out onto their porches to see what was happening. One of them was Margaret Chen from 3 houses down, who I knew had been on the fence about hiring me. "What's going on?" Margaret called out. "Russell, are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mrs. Chen. Just a misunderstanding about my work authorization." "Mrs. Atwood called 911 on him, Doctor," Patel announced to the gathering crowd. "She's trying to stop him from plowing driveways." That caused a stir. More residents came out, including 2 of my existing clients and several people who I recognized from the subdivision but didn't know personally. Karen tried to take control of the situation. "Everyone, please go back inside. This is an HOA matter and we're handling it." "By calling the cops on our snow plow guy," someone shouted from a porch. "I was going to hire him next week." "Me too," another voice added. "The HOA's vendor took 2 days to get to my driveway last storm." What happened next was something I'd only seen in movies. The residents of Meadowbrook Estates, at 3:30 in the morning, in the middle of a blizzard, held an impromptu street meeting about snow removal services. Colonel Richardson appointed himself moderator and asked for a show of hands of who was satisfied with the HOA's approved vendor. Out of the approximately 20 people who had gathered, 3 raised their hands. Then he asked who wanted the option to hire independent contractors like my company. 17 hands went up. Karen was furious. "This is not how our community makes decisions. We have proper procedures, board meetings, voting protocols." "Mrs. Atwood," a woman in a bathrobe interrupted, "you just called 911 at 3 in the morning because you don't like snow plow lights. I think we're past worrying about proper procedures." Deputy Foster was trying very hard not to laugh. Deputy Martinez had given up and was openly grinning. I focused on drinking my coffee and staying out of it. "I want everyone's name," Karen demanded, pulling out her phone. "You're all in violation of community bylaws and there will be fines." "For what?" Colonel Richardson asked. "Standing on our own properties, exercising free speech, discussing our dissatisfaction with HOA services, for inciting discord in the community, and for supporting unauthorized commercial activity." That's when Deputy Foster stopped grinning. "Madam, you can't fine people for talking to each other on their own property. And you definitely can't fine them for expressing opinions about HOA policies." "I absolutely can. It's in our bylaws." "Your bylaws don't supersede the First Amendment," Martinez pointed out. "And honestly, if you keep pushing this, you're going to end up with a lawsuit." Karen's phone rang again. This conversation was clearly heated, and when it ended, her expression had changed from smug to concerned. "I need to go. We're having an emergency board meeting in an hour." "At 4:30 in the morning?" Dr. Patel asked incredulously. "This situation requires immediate attention." Karen marched back to her Lexus and drove off, tires spinning slightly in the snow. The deputies stayed for another 20 minutes, mostly to make sure the crowd dispersed peacefully and to get statements about the incident for their reports. Colonel Richardson invited everyone to a meeting at his house the following evening to discuss forming a petition to change the HOA's vendor approval process. "Russell," he said as people started heading back to their homes, "I'm sorry you got dragged into our community politics." "Not your fault, Colonel. I've dealt with difficult HOAs before. Usually they give up after the first official complaint gets dismissed." "This one won't," he predicted. "Karen Atwood doesn't give up. She'll find another angle to attack you from." He was right, but I didn't know how right until the next afternoon when I received a certified letter from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board. The letter, written in dense legal language, informed me that I was hereby banned from entering the subdivision for any reason. Furthermore, any residents with existing contracts with my company were in violation of community standards and would be fined $500 per incident until the contracts were terminated. I called my attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Wells who specialized in contract law and had helped me navigate several previous HOA disputes. She read the letter over the phone and laughed. "They can't do this," she said flatly. "They can't ban a contractor from servicing existing contracts, and they definitely can't fine residents for exercising their property rights. This is textbook HOA overreach. So what do we do? You keep working. If they try to physically stop you, call the sheriff. If they fine any of your clients, have them contact me immediately. I'll file for an injunction. Meanwhile, I'm going to send this HOA a very strongly worded letter explaining that they're about to get sued into the ground if they don't back off." I spent the rest of that day servicing my other contracts around Grand Rapids, but that evening I had to return to Meadowbrook Estates for Mr. Richardson's meeting. About 30 residents showed up, cramming into his living room with cookies and coffee. Karen Atwood was not present, but 2 other board members were there: the treasurer, a nervous-looking man named Gary Mitchell, and the secretary, Deborah Anderson, who I'd tangled with before. Colonel Richardson started the meeting by summarizing the previous night's events. Then he opened the floor for discussion. What followed was 2 hours of residents venting their frustrations with the HOA's management, vendor policies, and particularly with Karen Atwood's leadership style. Gary Mitchell tried to explain the board's position. "Look, I understand everyone's frustrated, but the approved vendor fees help fund community projects." "What projects?" someone asked. "The entrance sign that was supposed to be replaced 2 years ago, the playground equipment that's still broken. Where's that money going?" Gary shifted uncomfortably. "I'd have to review the budgets." "You're the treasurer," Dr. Patel pointed out. "You should know where the money goes." Deborah Anderson jumped in. "The vendor fees are legitimate revenue streams authorized by our bylaws. Just because you don't like them doesn't make them illegal." "Nobody said they were illegal," Colonel Richardson responded. "But bylaws can be changed through proper resident voting procedures. That's what we're here to discuss." The meeting eventually produced a petition signed by 32 residents calling for a special election to amend the HOA bylaws regarding vendor approvals. Michigan HOA law required that 20% of residents sign such a petition, and Meadowbrook Estates had 140 homes, so they needed 28 signatures. They had exceeded that in one meeting. Karen Atwood responded the next day with another mass email to all residents. This one accused Colonel Richardson of organizing an illegal meeting, claimed the petition was invalid because it wasn't notarized, and threatened anyone who continued to support what she called the unauthorized contractor insurgency with additional fines and possible liens on their properties. That email was a mistake. Within 24 hours, the petition had 67 signatures. Patricia Wells filed for an injunction against the HOA in Kent County Circuit Court, and 3 residents filed their own lawsuit claiming harassment and violation of their property rights. Meanwhile, I still had snow to plow. The blizzard had finally let up, but we were getting steady snowfall every other day, keeping my crew busy. Each time I entered Meadowbrook Estates, I half expected to find some kind of barrier across the entrance. Instead, what I found was increasing support. People waved from their windows. Some left thank you notes on their mailboxes. Others hired me on the spot. By the end of February, I had contracts with 39 properties in the subdivision, and Karen Atwood looked like she was chewing glass every time she saw my truck. The court hearing for the injunction was scheduled for March 3rd. I had to take the day off work, which meant coordinating with my crew to cover all my contracts. Patricia Wells assured me that the hearing would be straightforward, but she wanted me there to explain the business side of things if the judge had questions. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, and Judge Robert Thornton looked like he'd already had a long day even though it was only 10 in the morning. Karen Atwood was there with the HOA's lawyer, a slick guy in an expensive suit named Bradley Cooper, which I'm sure caused him endless frustration when people made jokes about the actor. Patricia presented our case first, explaining that the HOA was attempting to use bylaws to restrict legal commerce and interfere with existing contracts. She emphasized that my work was authorized by county emergency services, and that the residents hiring me were exercising legitimate property rights. Bradley Cooper argued that HOAs have broad authority to regulate community standards, and that my operations violated noise ordinances, aesthetic guidelines, and traffic flow restrictions. He claimed the approved vendor system was necessary to maintain community integrity. Judge Thornton listened to both sides, reviewed the submitted documents, and asked several pointed questions. Mr. Cooper, are the residents of this HOA forbidden from hiring their own plumbers, electricians, landscapers? No, Your Honor, but those services don't involve repeated vehicle traffic through the community. So mail delivery should also be forbidden, garbage collection, Amazon deliveries. That's different, Your Honor. Those are necessary services. And snow removal during a blizzard isn't necessary. Judge Thornton looked incredulous. In Michigan, Cooper tried to backtrack. Of course, snow removal is necessary, but the HOA has provided for that through the approved vendor. An approved vendor that charges 3 times as much and only works during business hours, the judge noted, reading from the case file. And you're arguing that residents should be forced to use this vendor exclusively because, why exactly? To maintain community standards and proper oversight of commercial activities within the subdivision. Judge Thornton set down the papers and fixed Cooper with a look. I'm going to be blunt, counselor. This case appears to be about an HOA trying to enforce a monopoly on services for financial gain. The vendor approval fees go to the HOA, correct? They fund community improvements. That's not what I asked. Do these fees go to the HOA as revenue? Cooper hesitated. Yes, Your Honor. So the HOA has a direct financial interest in preventing residents from hiring independent contractors who don't pay these fees. The bylaws allow. I'm familiar with what HOA bylaws typically allow, Judge Thornton interrupted. I'm also familiar with Michigan property law and the constitutional right to contract freely. Miss Wells, I'm granting your injunction. The HOA is hereby prohibited from interfering with Mr. Irving's authorized business operations and from fining residents for hiring independent contractors for snow removal services. Furthermore, any fines already levied for this reason are to be refunded in full within 30 days. Karen Atwood made a sound like a tire deflating. Cooper tried to argue for a stay pending appeal, but Judge Thornton was done with the case. He signed the order right there and moved on to his next matter. Outside the courthouse, Patricia was pleased but cautious. They'll probably appeal, but this is a solid win. Keep documentation of all your work in that subdivision. If they try anything else, we'll be ready. I returned to work feeling vindicated but knowing this wasn't over. Karen Atwood didn't strike me as someone who accepted defeat gracefully. I was right, but what happened next went beyond HOA petness into actual criminal territory. It started with small acts of vandalism. One of my trucks had its tires slashed while parked overnight at one of my clients' houses in Meadowbrook Estates. Another time, someone poured sugar in the gas tank of my backup plow. Then my business sign at the subdivision entrance was spray painted with obscenities. I reported each incident to the sheriff's office, and Deputy Martinez took the reports seriously, but without witnesses or security footage, there wasn't much to investigate. The subdivision didn't have neighborhood cameras, and most residents didn't have doorbell cameras pointed toward the street. The situation escalated in mid-March during one of our last major snowfalls of the season. I was clearing Mrs. Henderson's driveway around 2 in the morning when my truck suddenly died, just shut down completely, engine and all. I tried to restart it, but nothing happened. No clicks, no sounds, just dead. I called my mechanic who came out with his tow truck. What he found made my blood run cold. Someone had cut the main wiring harness under the hood. Not accidentally damaged, but deliberately cut with something sharp. The truck had been sabotaged. Russell, this is beyond vandalism, my mechanic Tony said, shining his flashlight on the severed wires. Someone wanted to disable this truck specifically while you were using it. That's malicious destruction of property. Deputy Martinez came out again, this time with a detective named Sarah Kowalski who specialized in property crimes. She photographed the damage and took statements from me and Tony. "Have you had any direct threats?" Detective Kowalski asked. "Messages, confrontations, anything that would indicate who might do this." I told her about the ongoing HOA situation, the court case, and Karen Atwood's increasingly erratic behavior. "I'm not saying it was her," I added quickly. "But she's made it very clear she wants me out of this neighborhood." "Making threats in emails is one thing," Kowalski said. "Destroying property is another. This repair is going to cost what, a few $1,000s?" Tony nodded. "At least $3,000, maybe more if there's other damage I haven't found yet." "That makes it a felony," the detective noted. "I'm going to need copies of all your correspondence with this HOA, any security footage from your other trucks, and a list of times and locations where you've been working in this subdivision." Over the next week, Detective Kowalski conducted a thorough investigation. She interviewed residents, reviewed my documentation, and examined the other incidents of vandalism against my equipment. What she found was interesting. One of my clients, the Chen family, had recently installed a new security system with cameras covering their driveway and part of the street. Margaret Chen was happy to provide footage from the night my truck was sabotaged. The footage showed a dark-colored sedan pulling up behind my truck around 1:30 a.m., someone getting out, opening my hood, spending a few minutes doing something, then leaving. The detective enhanced the footage and got a partial plate number. Running that through DMV records with the make and model of the vehicle led to a name. Gregory Atwood, Karen's husband. Detective Kowalski called me with the update. "We've got enough for a warrant. I'm bringing in Mr. Atwood for questioning. I wanted to give you a heads up in case this causes problems with your work in that neighborhood." "Do what you need to do, detective. I just want this to stop." Gregory Atwood was arrested at his home on a Tuesday morning. The charges included felony destruction of property, criminal mischief, and conspiracy to interfere with a business. But here's where it got really interesting. When the police executed a search warrant on the Atwood home, they found documentation of all the HOA's finances, including the vendor fee scheme. Gary Mitchell, the nervous treasurer, had apparently been keeping secret records because he suspected financial impropriety. When Karen threatened him for not supporting her hard enough against me, he'd quietly contacted the Michigan Attorney General's office with evidence of embezzlement. Karen had been skimming from the vendor fees for years, amounting to nearly $80,000. The Attorney General's investigation moved quickly. By April, both Karen and Gregory Atwood were facing multiple charges. Karen was charged with embezzlement, fraud, and abuse of position. Gregory faced his charges related to vandalizing my trucks, plus additional charges for threatening witnesses when Colonel Richardson mentioned he'd seen a dark sedan in the neighborhood on suspicious nights. The HOA board held an emergency election. Karen was removed as president immediately, and Deborah Anderson resigned in protest. 3 new board members were elected, including Colonel Richardson and Dr. Patel. Their first act was to eliminate the vendor approval fee system and issue a formal apology to me and my clients. The criminal cases went to trial in June. I had to testify about the vandalism and the business interference. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage, financial records, email trails showing Karen coordinating with her husband to sabotage my equipment. Everything painted a clear picture of a vindictive HOA president who had broken the law to protect her illegal income stream. Gregory Atwood took a plea deal, admitting to 3 counts of property destruction and 1 count of witness intimidation. He got 2 years probation and had to pay restitution for all damages to my trucks, plus court costs. Karen Atwood refused to plea and went to full trial. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found her guilty on 7 of 9 counts, including embezzlement of more than $50,000, fraud, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 18 months. Plus, she had to pay back the full amount of stolen money with interest and penalties. Standing in that courtroom, listening to the sentence being read, I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. All of this started because I wanted to plow driveways. Karen Atwood had turned it into a crusade that destroyed her freedom, her finances, and her reputation. Her husband faced his own consequences, and their family was shattered. After the sentencing, several reporters wanted interviews. I gave one statement to the local news. "I'm glad justice was served, but I wish it hadn't come to this. All I wanted was to do my job and help my clients." HOAs serve important purposes, but they're not above the law, and they shouldn't interfere with residents' basic rights to hire services they need. The case got significant media attention, particularly in HOA reform circles. Michigan legislators even referenced it when proposing new laws to increase financial transparency for homeowner associations and limit their authority over independent contractors. Colonel Richardson called me after the verdict. "Russell, the new board wants to offer you something. How would you feel about being the official snow removal contractor for all community-maintained areas in Meadowbrook Estates? Streets, common areas, the entrance. Proper contract, fair rates, no kickback fees. After everything that happened, you want to hire me officially. Especially after everything that happened. You showed integrity under pressure. You didn't back down when threatened, you didn't retaliate, and you handled everything by the book. That's the kind of contractor we want representing our community." I accepted the contract. That winter, I plowed not just my individual clients' properties, but also maintained the entire subdivision's common areas. My amber lights became a welcome sight on snowy nights, not a source of controversy. Mrs. Henderson recovered from her hip surgery and made me a photo album as a thank you gift, filled with pictures of her cleared driveway throughout the winter and a note that said, "To the man who kept me safe." The Patels referred me to 6 other medical professionals who needed reliable emergency access for their own work schedules. Mr. Richardson, the colonel, became something of a mentor to me, sharing his business wisdom over regular coffee meetings. The criminal case had one final postscript. As part of her restitution requirements, Karen Atwood had to liquidate assets to repay the embezzled money. The HOA recovered their funds and used them to finally complete the long-delayed community improvements that were supposed to have been done years ago. New playground equipment, a refurbished entrance sign, repaved streets. All the things the vendor fees were supposed to have funded. Deborah Anderson, the former board secretary who resigned in protest, issued a public apology 6 months later. She admitted she'd known about the embezzlement, but had been afraid to come forward. She'd convinced herself the vendor fee system was legitimate and had ignored the warning signs. Her statement included an acknowledgement that her loyalty to Karen had been misplaced and that she should have listened to residents' concerns. The HOA reform movement gained significant traction in Michigan. By the following year, the state legislature had passed 3 new laws specifically addressing HOA oversight, financial transparency, and restrictions on vendor monopolies. My case was cited in the committee hearings as an example of how HOA corruption could escalate into criminal activity when left unchecked. For me, the biggest change was internal. I'd started this saga frustrated and defensive, wondering if I should just walk away from Meadowbrook Estates to avoid the hassle. By the end, I understood something important about business and community. Standing up for what's right isn't just about principle. It's about protecting the people who depend on you. Mrs. Henderson needed her driveway cleared for her health aide. The Patels needed to get to the hospital to save lives. Colonel Richardson needed reliable service because he was too old to shovel his own driveway. My business wasn't just about plowing snow. It was about providing essential service to people who counted on me. When Karen Atwood called 911 about my plow lights that night, she thought she was exercising her authority. When Deputy Martinez showed her my emergency services authorization, he thought he was just resolving a nuisance call. Neither of them knew they were starting a chain of events that would expose corruption, change state laws, and redefine how HOAs operate in Michigan. The following winter was busy but peaceful. I'd expanded my crew to 4 trucks, hired 2 more drivers, and taken on contracts across 3 counties. Meadowbrook Estates remained one of my favorite accounts, not because of the money, but because of the community that had formed around defending basic rights and common sense. On the anniversary of that first 911 call, Colonel Richardson organized a neighborhood appreciation party in the subdivision's community center. It was ostensibly a general thank you event for local service providers, but everyone knew it was really about celebrating the resolution of the HOA nightmare. They invited Deputy Martinez and Detective Kowalski, who both came and shared their perspectives on the case. Martinez told a story I hadn't heard before. When dispatch first told me I had a 911 call about a snow plow, I thought someone had been hit or there was an accident. When I realized the caller just didn't like the lights, I spent the entire drive out there trying to figure out how to explain that 911 is for emergencies. I never imagined it would turn into felony charges and prison time. Detective Kowalski added her own observation. Cases like this remind me that crime isn't always what you'd expect. It's not always the obvious things like robberies or assaults. Sometimes it's people in positions of minor authority who forget that laws apply to them too. Mrs. Atwood thought her position as HOA president gave her special privileges. She learned the hard way that it didn't. Dr. Patel raised his glass in a toast. To Russell Irving, who just wanted to plow some driveways and ended up reforming HOA law in Michigan. Everyone laughed, but Mrs. Henderson, now fully recovered and feisty as ever, added her own toast. To standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, and to neighbors who support each other instead of tearing each other down. That got a round of applause. The party wrapped up around 9 p.m. As people were leaving, Margaret Chen approached me with her husband. "Russell, we never properly thanked you. If our security footage hadn't caught Gregory Atwood, he might have done worse. And who knows if anyone would have discovered the embezzlement." "You installed that system to protect your property," I said. "You couldn't have known it would solve a crime." "But we're glad it did," her husband added. "This neighborhood is better now than it's been in years. People actually talk to each other. We have block parties. The new board listens to residents." All of that came from this terrible situation. Driving home that night, I reflected on the entire experience. From that first confrontation at 3 in the morning to the criminal trials to the legislative changes, the whole saga had taken almost a year. It had cost me thousands in legal fees, even though I'd eventually recovered damages. It had stressed me out, kept me up nights worrying about my business, and forced me to confront levels of pettiness and vindictiveness I hadn't known existed. But it had also connected me with amazing people. Colonel Richardson became a friend and advisor. The Patels sent me referrals constantly. Mrs. Henderson treated me like a grandson. The entire community of Meadowbrook Estates had rallied around principles of fairness and common sense. And those amber lights on my plow truck, the ones that had started everything, continued to cut through snowy darkness every winter, doing exactly what they were designed to do, keeping people safe and roads clear during emergencies. No HOA president would ever call 911 about them again. The legal battles were over. The criminals were punished. The reforms were enacted. Life returned to something resembling normal, except better than before because people had learned important lessons about community, authority, and the rule of law. Sometimes I still see Gregory Atwood around town. He works at a hardware store now, doing his community service hours and trying to rebuild his life. We don't talk, but there's a mutual acknowledgement that we were both caught up in something larger than ourselves. His wife's ambition and criminal behavior had dragged him into actions he probably never would have considered on his own. Karen Atwood served 14 months before making parole. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved to another state after her release, starting over somewhere her reputation hadn't preceded her. I hope she learned something from the experience, but I honestly don't know. What I do know is that my business thrived. The publicity from the case, while stressful during the events, ultimately raised my profile. I became known as the contractor who stood up to HOA corruption, which resonated with a lot of people. My client base tripled. I had to hire additional staff, buy more equipment, and eventually lease a proper facility for my trucks and supplies. Patricia Wells, my attorney, used the case as a precedential example in several other HOA disputes across Michigan. She told me that my willingness to fight back rather than capitulate had made it easier for other contractors and homeowners to stand up to similar overreach. The precedent we set in court became cited law in subsequent cases. The Michigan Attorney General's office launched a broader investigation into HOA financial practices statewide after the Atwood case. They discovered that embezzlement and kickback schemes were more common than anyone had realized. Dozens of HOA board members faced charges over the next 2 years. The reforms that followed included mandatory annual audits, public financial reporting, and term limits for board positions. For Meadowbrook Estates specifically, the transformation was remarkable. Under the new board leadership, resident satisfaction increased dramatically. They eliminated several other problematic policies beyond just the vendor approval system. They created a resident advisory council that gave homeowners direct input on community decisions. They established transparent budgeting processes with quarterly reports available to all residents. The subdivision became something of a model for how HOAs should operate. They were featured in a local news segment about HOA reform, with Colonel Richardson and Dr. Patel explaining how resident engagement and accountability had transformed their community. I was invited to that interview too, though I kept my comments brief. The story was really about the residents, not about me. By the third winter after the initial incident, plowing Meadowbrook Estates felt completely different. Instead of watching for Karen Atwood's silver Lexus in my rearview mirror, I exchanged waves with residents who came out to say hello. Instead of worrying about vandalism, I parked my trucks confidently knowing the community had my back. Instead of fighting to do my job, I was celebrated for doing it well. The professional relationships I'd built extended beyond just snow removal too. Several clients hired me for other property maintenance services in the off-season. Colonel Richardson referred me to his veterans organization, which led to contracts maintaining several nonprofit facilities. Dr. Patel connected me with hospital administrators, expanding my commercial accounts. But the most satisfying aspect was the principle of the thing. I'd started that snowy February night just trying to clear driveways for people who needed the service. When faced with unreasonable opposition, I hadn't folded. When vandalized and sabotaged, I'd reported it properly instead of retaliating. When the legal system moved slowly, I'd been patient. And in the end, justice had prevailed. That's not always how these stories end. Sometimes the bad guys win. Sometimes fighting back costs more than it's worth. Sometimes standing on principle leaves you worse off than if you just walked away. I was fortunate that my case had documented evidence, good legal counsel, and a community willing to support what was right. I also learned something about HOAs themselves. They're not inherently bad. They serve legitimate purposes in maintaining property values and community standards. But like any organization given authority over others, they require oversight, transparency, and accountability. When those checks and balances fail, when board members forget they are serving their neighbors rather than ruling over them, problems escalate quickly. The reforms enacted after my case tried to address those systemic issues. Whether they'll be sufficient in the long term remains to be seen. But for now, in Michigan at least, HOAs operate under greater scrutiny and with more protections for homeowners than they did before Karen Atwood decided my plow lights were worth calling 911 over. And those lights, those perfectly legal amber emergency lights, still flash through the darkness every winter night when snow falls and people need their driveways clear. They shine as a reminder that essential services don't stop for convenience, that emergency authorization means something real, and that sometimes a simple snow plow driver can stand up to corruption and win. The story could have ended a dozen different ways. If Deputy Martinez had been less professional, if Judge Thornton had sided with the HOA, if the Chen family hadn't installed those security cameras, if Gary Mitchell hadn't kept his secret financial records, if Colonel Richardson hadn't organized the residents, any of those different factors might have changed the outcome. But they didn't. Everything aligned in favor of what was right and legal over what was convenient and profitable for corrupt officials. The system worked the way it's supposed to work, even though it took time and effort and perseverance. Looking back now from several years later, the whole experience feels almost surreal. Did an HOA president really call 911 about snow plow lights? Did that really escalate into embezzlement charges and prison time? Did it really change state law? Yes, to all of it. Sometimes reality is stranger than fiction, and sometimes small confrontations reveal much larger problems that needed addressing anyway. Mrs. Henderson passed away 2 winters ago at the age of 92. I was honored to be invited to her memorial service. In her eulogy, her daughter mentioned me by name, talking about how her mother had felt safe and cared for during her recovery, because her driveway was always clear, because a reliable contractor had stood up to bullying and intimidation to keep serving his clients. That meant more to me than any payment or publicity ever could. The Patels eventually moved to a larger house in a different subdivision when their family grew. Before they left, Dr. Patel told me, "You taught this neighborhood something important, Russell. You taught us that we don't have to accept injustice just because it comes from an official-looking letterhead. We can question authority when it's wrong. We can stand together for common sense." Those lessons extended far beyond snow removal. Colonel Richardson is still in the subdivision, still active on the HOA board, still mentoring younger residents about community engagement. He calls me occasionally just to check in, and we meet for coffee every few months. At one of those meetings, he told me something I'll never forget. "You know what the real lesson was, Russell? It wasn't about HOA reform or corruption. It was about how one person doing their job with integrity can change an entire community. You could have walked away from Meadowbrook Estates when the trouble started. Most contractors would have. But you believed in serving your clients and you believed in following the law, and you didn't let anyone bully you out of those principles. That's leadership." I'd never thought of myself as a leader. I was just a guy who plowed snow for a living. But maybe that's the point. Leadership isn't always about grand gestures or important positions. Sometimes it's about doing the right thing consistently, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. The snow keeps falling every winter, and I keep clearing it. My trucks are newer now. My crew is larger. My business is more successful than I ever imagined when I started out. But the core mission hasn't changed. Provide reliable, professional service to people who need it, when they need it, regardless of whether it's convenient or during approved hours or acceptable to some HOA board. Those amber lights will keep flashing through winter nights for as long as I'm in this business. They represent something bigger than just warning lights on a plow truck now. They represent the idea that essential services matter, that emergency authorization has real meaning, and that ordinary people can stand up to corruption and win when they have the law and common sense on their side. Karen Atwood called 911 over my plow lights at night. The sheriff said I was authorized for 24-hour emergency response. That should have been the end of the story. A simple misunderstanding corrected by showing proper documentation. Instead, it became a journey through HOA corruption, criminal vandalism, legal battles, and ultimately, meaningful reform. But every journey has to end somewhere, and this one ends with me still plowing snow, still serving my clients, still driving through winter nights with those amber lights flashing, knowing that somewhere in Meadowbrook Estates and dozens of other communities, people sleep peacefully because their driveways will be clear in the morning, because someone stood up for the right to provide that service, because justice eventually prevailed over petty tyranny and greed. That's the real ending, not the dramatic courtroom scenes or the news coverage or the reformed laws, though all of that mattered. The real ending is the quiet continuation of essential work, done well, done legally, done without interference from people who thought their small authority gave them the right to override common sense and statutory law. The snow will fall again next winter, and I'll be ready with my trucks and my crew and those amber lights that started everything. And if anyone calls 911 to complain, well, the sheriff will tell them exactly what Deputy Martinez told Karen Atwood that cold February night. This contractor is fully authorized for emergency operations, and no HOA bylaw can change that fact.